television on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Please welcome Whitney Houston and Mariah.
I know this is about Whitney and Mariah, but Oprah's got some good vocal chops.
Please welcome Whitney Houston and Mariah.
Okay, Oprah.
Many nights.
Holy 90s Batman. This hair.
Now we are not afraid.
This is awesome. The way that she's handling the words.
Understood. Now we are not.
Anytime you have like no or not, it's a good idea not to sustain it, right? You want no to be a very punctual thing. Like, no, we are not. It sounds weird if like, we are not doing that. You know, it's just weird. So, like, knowing the words that you're singing, kind of a big deal.
We were moving mountains long.
Ooh, how many notes can you fit in there? Dang.
Fear. We were moving mountains long.
So part of that is the vibrato, but also part of this is just how good she is at backing off in terms of air. The more air you put in, the fatter the folds. All right. I had pieces of paper for this demonstration. Let's see. Yeah, I still do. Bernoulli effect. Very, very important that you understand this, because this is why more air brings together the folds more. As the air pressure from my lips blows past, I'm basically blowing all of the pressure away. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the pressure is lower, boom, come together, right? So that is how the folds come together. One of the ways, the primary way that the folds come together is you blow air through them and they come together. Now, the more you do that, the thicker they become. So these runs,
although we know there's much to fear,
have to be done with ridiculously gentle breath. A way you can practice this is not there. So these being gradual are how you can learn to control very little air. And so this all has a matter to do with the volume, right? So there's a direct correlation between how fat the folds are and how much volume is there. We measure sound in sound pressure level, right? You force the air molecules together and then they go like this, and that's what makes the waveform. So the fatter your folds are, the more literal pressure builds up, and then boom, they release. More pressure, build up, boom, release. When you're thin like this, it's very delicate. So notice how the sound, the volume changes. She is directly adding more air.
fear. We were moving mountains long.
Right? When it's quiet, there's less air. When there's loud, there's more.
There can be miracles.
Ooh, lovely. I want to show one other thing that it's a little bit misleading to say that more air is exclusively responsible for more volume. I want you to pay attention to the vowels as well.
Ooh, yes.
Doing low notes with brighter vowels in general, create more volume in the same way that adding distortion to a guitar does. When you add distortions to a guitar, you get way more frequency range, right? The higher notes have the higher frequencies are just like through the roof. The same thing happens if you do lower notes like this, not bright at all, versus by virtue of there being more and more volume on the higher frequencies, therefore you have a louder note.
Frail, it's hard to kill.
Ooh, gorgeous. This little thing she does here.
There can be miracles.
This
There can be miracles.
This is a pretty cool onset. So an onset is the beginning of a note. So she is using k. Any consonant where you have a buildup of air can be tricky. So in the one we just reviewed with Mariah, she did it very gently and then came on the note. What's being done here is that k is being used to actually build up more air pressure. She is not in a part of her range where that would compromise her ability to sing on pitch and her ability to sing comfortably, right? She's been using very little air for the most part in this performance. Here,
Oh, yes. There can be miracles.
that the K builds up air pressure that she manages very, very, very well. It's just giving her more power, and she's earned that power because the rest of the performance has been very gentle. Dynamics are relative, right? Your piano can be, the more piano your piano can be, the more dramatic your higher notes will be. So don't blow a lot of your stuff early in the performance.
Oh, you cannot cheat.
I can't, like, I'm actually giddy. Haven't seen this before, but I totally am there with the audience here. Like, oh my God.
Somehow you will.
I love Whitney. I love the way that she's always so attentive to the words. And she's so grounded in her performance. And the same is true for Mariah. But like, Mariah adds a little bit, like the technique part of making musical decisions. Mariah does a little bit more tricks. You've got a little bit more in the bag.
My love, you.
And I want to make very clear that doesn't mean she's a better artist. It means she has more technique things that she can do, which is not synonymous with art, right? Like, someone can have a really big toolkit and they can't make a shed, right? Whereas someone with a hammer and nail can. Anyway, you get my point.
When prayer so often rules in vain.
Ooh. Ooh. The vowels here.
When prayer so often rules in vain.
The way that her lips are pursed here makes the lower notes louder. I can actually demonstrate this, is the volume. So when we go for this and we record it and we do with bright vowels on the same notes, we'll do we'll do bright and then we'll do dark. Oh. You see how not only is the bottom frequency the fundamental, right? The lowest frequency in the note. Not only is that brighter, but the ones above it are brighter. Now, what you're missing here is that on the left, there's more frequencies in the higher range, right? But if you want low and you want it to be more pronounced in contrast, which is, I believe, what she's going to do, you want to change your vowels to something that's darker, where the lips are more forward.
Too swiftly flown away.
The way that she is bringing... So we talked about, like, when Whitney was singing, more air, thicker folds. Bernoulli effect, right? Ring a bell? So when we're talking about this, we also have to talk about that the folds don't just like come together, right? You can get this entire mix of range. So if you're very delicate with your breath, you can get some adduction with some separation, creating a breathy tone. So Mariah is doing a whole mess of things to make that happen.
When prayer so often rules in vain.
And this is what I mean by Mariah has more tools technically. I can't think of another singer with the amount of technical ability and knowledge of Mariah Carey. Like, just no one comes to mind. At least no one who sounds good. There are people who have silly range, and there's literally the male who has the record for the highest note on piano. I don't like the tone of his voice. But I mean, obviously really talented, but I love Mariah's sound. So she's using technique to get different colors here. Right? Technique is not just how many notes you can hit, right? There's more things you can do with your voice than hit different notes. Too swiftly flown away. So this breathy stuff is what I was talking about, where immediately she is immediately changing how much air she is using in order to create this effect. Words I never thought I'd say. So there are two ways to hit this level of breathiness. One is to use very, very, very little air so that the folds don't adduct, or they partially adduct. The other method is to blow so much air that they blow open. Younger singers or less experienced singers think that this is a bad thing. Right? Because it's the only thing they can do. When they go up, it's like, I can't sing in full voice. And then you hear other singers blowing their folds open and they're like, anyway, let's watch how it's a good thing in the hands of someone who's, good at it. Hope seems like the summer birds. That. Like the summer birds. So that is very delicate air. That's not blowing the folds apart. The reason she can do that is because the S, the consonant. If your folds are already together, you pretty much have to blow them open. It's very, very hard when your folds are already adducted to change the thickness of it because you're already exhaling. Like, you'd have to suspend your rib cage. There are things you can do. But to get to the point where they're adducted and then unadducted, that's nightmarishly difficult. That's not what she's doing. What she does is she changes the adduction of the folds and how adducted they are on a consonant that does not involve the vocal folds. S is a unvoiced consonant. Often losing vain, hope seems right? Like the sun. That's where the folds are not together. These are unvoiced consonants, okay? So what that means is that the folds are not together because they don't have a pitch. So because they don't have a pitch, in the middle of the phrase, she can change how adducted the folds are. So she's not blowing open the folds here. Often losing vain, hope seems like the sun. So there is also an aspirate after that sound. Hope seems like the summer birds. But that's how, even within the same phrase, she can dramatically change her tone and how adducted the folds are. It's super clever and also very difficult to do that quickly. Too swiftly flown away, yet now that's the folds blowing open. So this is another example of blowing the folds open. She's using an aspirate to do that. Again, that's a sound like an H sound. It's very difficult to catch the aspirate, but it's there. Her dynamic range, her ability to control her own volume is insane. There can be miracle. So that is again, an unvoiced consonant creating a sudden onset. So ha, right, where the folds kind of meet very quickly. And then she's also turning it into a belt. Out of all the things we've covered, belting is the most difficult of anything that I've said so far. In that it takes so little air to belt. So I said that the fatter the folds, the louder, right? And I said that you can adjust how fat your folds are based on how much air you use or not, right? Well, there's another thing you can do. There are cartilages, I think that's plural of cartilage, yeah, cartilages in the throat that can move and affect the vocal folds. Belting is the lowest, if you go like to the very bottom of your Adam's apple, that's the cricoid cartilage. Now that sucker can tilt and fatten the folds. The consequence of that is belting is loud. You can't have a quiet belt, right? So the folds are super fat. Now the issue here is you actually can't use too much air in this instance. You have to use very, very, very little air, or at worst you'll go flat. Oh no, at best you'll go flat. At worst you'll actually cause what's called a vocal hemorrhage. So these folds are fat, they're fat, and then they blow open and then they punch together like that. That can cause a hemorrhage where there's bleeding of the folds.
There can be miracles.
So that right there, that's her tilting her cricoid cartilage.
When you believe, hope is here.
And she keeps doing this really cool thing with the unvoiced consonants.
It's hard to kill, hard to kill.
They're so good musically together. I love this so much. I'm a big, so just so people know, like Whitney Houston is like my wedding song was I Want to Dance with Somebody, right? Like my wife and I have a special spot for Whitney, and this is just amazing to hear them complement each other so well.
When you believe, somehow you will.
This is the most 90s ballad I think I might have ever seen in my life. Just a heads up. Like, this is so 90s, it's crazy. The way that they're playing off each other is crazy here. So blending is a topic in and of itself. So when we go back to the spectrogram, saw before, right? Different vowels have different frequencies, right? So when you're blending, you're trying to make your vowel so that the frequencies in your singing match acoustically the vowel in another person's singing. So this, which was a and then ooh, or whatever it was, that would be a bad blend, right? You see how there's just, this is demonstrably different, right? To that tuning, it's so exact. That is what a magical blend sounds like when you are perfectly together with another singer. This takes a lot of attention to detail, again, because of how you have to adjust your vowels. And then again, when they go separate from each other, they use different vowels. Oh my god. That's freaking epic. There's a different cartilage that can move called the thyroid cartilage. So the thyroid cartilage is basically the Adam's apple, traditionally what you'd think of as the Adam's apple. It's like a bulge. It's a very big cartilage. And you can tilt this sucker, and that's where vibrato comes from. It also deepens the sound of your voice. So you can tilt the thyroid cartilage like, Amazing Grace. So that was with tilted and just a tiny bit of tension. If I did Grace, by tilting the thyroid, I warm up my sound. So that's what they're doing here. They're throwing just a tiny bit of tension to prevent the movement that naturally happens to the thyroid cartilage when you tilt it, aka vibrato. So this is where they're tilting the thyroid cartilage, but they're just, again, it's the tiniest bit of tension. You don't need a lot, and it's not unhealthy if you adjust your breath accordingly. So they're both, that vibrato, they're doing the thyroid cartilage. But I also want to point out that they were using the cricoid cartilage before that. And this is, if they do what I think they're going to do, this is going to blow your mind. Yeah, there's vibrato here, right? on. Very, very light vibrato. So you can tilt both at the same time, which is what blows my mind when people do that. You can tilt the cricoid cartilage, get that insane volume. Now the thing with belting is usually you do it with a high larynx, so it doesn't bring a lot of like low lusciousness with it. It's just like super hot in the higher frequency range, right? But when you do both, you get the best of both worlds. You get that epic belt, a little bit more of the low lushness, and some vibrato. So and it just barely happens. If you listen carefully, the thyroid tilt comes in on the belt briefly. I'm not sure if, I think it might have been Whitney. I'm not sure, but one of them was also doing this like crazy grind. I'm not sure if that was the false folds or the actual folds. It's actually hard to distinguish the two of them. They're doing a great job blending, and they both just sound so epic. It's hard to choose which one is doing it, or discern rather. So this, that little sizzle that Mariah has to her voice, don't ever try to make that sound. The reason why it's happening to her is the nodules that she has. She could adjust so that this sound wasn't being made, but it's really cool as a way to like add some intensity to the sound. So what's happening is that when the nodules meet, or when they delicately separate the folds. So what are nodules? Nodules are, if we go back to our Bernoulli effect demonstration, right? Boom. Nodules are basically calluses that form on the folds, right? So one of the cool things that can happen is when the folds close and there's that bump in the way, you can get the sizzle from the bumps where they're touching. The problem with doing that, the difficulty with doing that, is if the nodules touch, you'll sing two different pitches at the same time, because it's basically like, imagine a guitar, but there's a body, like there's one neck, two bodies, right? If I hit a note here, boom, sound. If I hit a note here, boom, sound in that body, right? So that's what happens when the nodules meet and the folds are separated. But if you can be so precise as to make the nodules not hit each other, and then they're like in different parts, like if I have one nodule here, and then they're kind of both together there. If you separate the folds enough, just enough, and you have to be exact about this, you can get this grindy effect. That's why I say don't do it, because it's because she has nodules that she can do this. And it's also demented difficult. You have to be extremely precise. You hear what I'm saying? Like this, it sounds violent. It's actually not. It's incredibly precise. This is true of almost all harsh vocals. Like when you listen to screaming and metal, you're like, "Oy, that must hurt." But there are a lot of people who do it in such a way where it's actually healthy. But the trick to it is unbelievable amounts of very little air. It takes, it's so dangerous if you put a lot of air behind something like that. I'm not worried about it with Mariah. Mariah might know a thing or two about breath control, so. Ooh, that's marvelous. What a sound. So what's cool about that, what makes that sound so nice, is she has a mix, right? Some of the folds are together. Well, some, yeah. So there's this, right? There's a little bit of a hole between the two folds, right? She's only partially adducting them. That's what a mix is, right? So she has this mix. It's very on the breathy end, but then she puts the thyroid cartilage behind it. So the thyroid cartilage not only warms the tone and gets that vibrato going, it also stretches out the folds like a rubber band, right? So you're stretching the folds. So what was this is now like this. It's very long, The thing, though, that happens is when you stretch those folds like that, they come together. It is very difficult to make them not come together when they're pulled like a rubber band, right? But she is accomplishing that. She has a mix with this thyroid tilt, and the sound is beautiful. Right, it's got that breathiness. It's not entirely falsetto. The playing off of rhythm is so cute. That's really cool. So there's call and response, and then there's call, right? Which is what I love about this. That tuning is gorgeous. Look at the vowels too. Mariah has her lips retracted, again, brighter vowel, and Whitney has hers like relaxed and pursed, less of a bright vowel. It's gorgeous. They're so precise. Pitch it is hard to this effect, right? Because you have to make it the difference between a couple of cents, 1/100th of a half step, right? When you want to do harmonies that are this tight. Usually you don't land right on, like if you listen to an orchestra or choir, it takes them just a second to get that lock where the harmonies are like, again, like not equal temperament, right? Where they're like really sonorous and really, really nicely tuned to one another. And they're just jumping right on it. Going flat is actually almost always not a problem of musicianship. It's a problem of technique. Any number of things could happen to drag down the pitch. Your vowels can be bad. There could be too much air, too little air. Like there's a bunch of things that basically anything that happens with technique will affect pitch unless you muscle and manipulate your pitch up while you have these bad habits, which is a nightmare. Like, don't ever do that. If you're off pitch, it's a sign that you need to work on your technique. Don't go forcing stuff to be on tune. The reason why this is so on tune so quickly, whereas a choir would generally take a little bit more, is that the choir is manipulating their voice for being not totally in tune because of the consequence of bad technique and maybe an issue of musicianship. But the reason why they get together on it like that is technique. It's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. There's oh my God. Please, if you're a singer and you're learning, learn to sustain your notes, right? Like before you worry about your high notes, worry about this effortless sound right here. I am shocked at how many people on the singing subreddit talk about their range and cannot sustain a note. Every high note here, every high note in this performance was amazingly sustained, effortless, and on pitch, right? If you sustain, you're changing your vowels. All of a sudden, you're changing the note. If your vowels change, you have to make slight adjustments or you will go flat. It's cool to talk about the tricks that these singers use. It's cool. I like it. But fundamentally, both of them have amazing technique so that the stuff that's not tricks sounds great. Like right here, like at the end here. That's not fancy. It's a thyroid tilt and E vowels. But it's beautiful. One, they have amazing voices, right? Like, can't take that away from them. Your acoustics is, something you're born with, how your flesh parts resonate. That's just, you can't fix that. But good technique really does help the tone. And so when I hear this, oh, that makes me swoon. Learn to sustain your notes, please.